All right, so, all right, leave this up here. All right, so I'm going to speak about thermal refuges. So I'm sure everyone here is familiar with what they are, but maybe they won't be when I talk about what they are in terms of fish bioenergetics here today. So if you think about this wave overview, first think about, I'm going to speak about research that we've done on this topic, and then speak about it towards scale. So here we have different scales, either spatial scale on the y-axis. So we might have a riverscape or a catchment, and we could have a reach, or we could have a microscale, something very fine, kind of what Elise is speaking about the thermal refuge work. Then, of course, you have a temporal scale, so you can just change it through time, where we can talk about a moment, a week, a season, or even interannual, so how things change across years. So just by way of example, then here we may have a riverscape or a catchment, and we may have a reach scale here. So this is a very fine scale illustration, thermal infrared imagery of Otterbrook in the southwest. This is just from a moment, so a photograph, a thermal infrared photograph taken in a moment. We can think about this change in the use of space, maybe at the weak heat scale. So this is the paper we published last year on how adult salmon use different hydraulic habitats through the summer, or excuse me, through a different temperature regime across a couple of weeks. And then we have this scale here, so we can look at seasonal and interannual changes at that reach scale. So this would be, this is Otterbrook, which Elise has spoken about. So here we have temperature, these will be within the same day. So this is in the morning, this is in the afternoon, and then this is an extreme temperature event when the river hit 31.5 degrees Celsius. We'll speak about that. And then, of course, we have different scales at the micro scale. So looking at what's going on within the refuge. So that's what Elise is doing. And so we have this variation that's seasonal, but it's also interannual. And that's kind of what Elise was speaking of brook trout, that the thermal regimes that they seek out thermal refuges are not constant through time, they vary, all right? So with that, I'm going to talk about this here. So we're going to talk about fish swimming speed, cost, but we're going to use these data here, and it'll become more apparent in a minute. So, and then finally, sorry, I'm going to show some applications. So testing these models that we have to see if they actually work in real life. That's the most important thing. All models are wrong. They're all bullshit, but some of them are useful. Okay, so what we're going to show here is how useful they may be. Okay, so again, Otterbrook here. What is behavioral thermoregulation? I always start with this because I'm a moron, and I expect everyone else is a moron like me, so we can all be morons together. So here is an aggregation from 2020. This is in Parksbrook, one of Elise's sites. This is not normal behavior, right? Or whatever normal is, but this is not normal. Very, very territorial species. Thousands of fish there, quite incredible. And if we look at this exact same reach, when the temperatures are dropped back, there's no fish there. Exactly what Elise showed in the photographs of brook trout, we see the same in Atlantic salmon. All right, happy days. So I have a question then, because I've been working on this for 3 years, and I'm following the coattails of Rick Hunjack, really, Simon Sari, Al Curry, Emily Corey. All of our work is kind of accumulating through those folks. And I'm an engineer, so I'm looking at it probably differently than they would. But I have a couple of questions. So the first question is, what is the benefit of having access to a thermal refuge during periods of temperature-induced stress for salmonids? And I'm lazy, so I don't want to work very hard. So to do that, we can use remote sensing. All right. So we can look here. We have this thermal camera. So it's looking at temperature. It's not looking at temperature, it's looking at emissivity, but we can get temperature from that very fine scale. All right, and we can also look at the, so that's the thermal camera there. Then we have an optical camera that's giving us what we see in our eyes. So red, green, blue, seeing what we see in the room here. So we can use these things to establish some processes from these images that are relevant to the fish. So here we have the study site. I'm going to move this over here so I can see the screen. All right. So here we have the study site. There's a thermal refuge there. It's kind of blurred. Here's Otterbrook. And hard to see here, but there's adult salmon here in the yellow arrows, and there's brook trout in here too. So this refuge can hold adult salmon, 2+ par, 1+ par, annual of the year, and brook trout of various classes, age classes, all right? So this is a really nice spot. Then what we want to do is to look at different hydraulic regimes that may exist. So again, we can go out and fly this thermal infrared and this optical imagery. We can collect temperature data and dissolved oxygen data, pH data, all that good stuff, pH, and we can collect velocity and depth data, all right? So we can build then maps like this. So this is the depth map. The depth map is derived from a photograph. So if you think about light going through the water, it decays exponentially. So if you go deeper down, it's harder to see, right? The light is essentially eaten by the water as you go down in depth, and that's a function of turbidity and other stuff that is going on. But you can build a relationship between what you see in a photograph and depth. And think about it yourself. So if you're out fishing, you can tell a pool from a run, right? Pools are darker in color. So that's all you're doing here. You can swipe that. Then once you've this made, you can build a hydraulic model. So now you can look at the velocities at very fine scales. So we have depth and we have velocity. And then what we have is temperature throughout a day and then seasonally. So this is Otterbrook, July 18th, 2022 at about 11:30 in the morning. So the main stem is 22 degrees Celsius. We went back and flew it the same day at 5:45 and it was 26.8. So you have that big shift in temperature, what, 4.8 degrees Celsius. But the thing to look at here is that this thermal refuge stays relatively cool. All right, so that's within a day variation. But then we can look at it. This is data from my old honors student, now my master's student, Alex Morgan's honors project. And here it's 31.5 degrees Celsius. This is boiling. Like, this is seriously hot. But this refuge stays about 21 degrees Celsius. Right? So what's going on there is this is the groundwater fed tributary. So similar to the end of the case of this area, you have these really relatively deep superficial deposits. So about 14 meters deep. And at 14 meters deep, the thermal regime is relatively stable, about 7 degrees Celsius. It doesn't change throughout the year. So it doesn't freeze in the winter and it doesn't get that warm in the summer. So it's kind of similar to kind of the case of groundwater dominant. So we can start to integrate these things and try to look at how energetically expensive it is for a fish to swim there. So the swim cost is a function of temperature, fish size, and the velocity of the water, all right? And we can also get DO, but we don't put it into these models, but just to give you guys a taste, something that my mates and I are working on where we can look at DO variation through a day and from remote sensing as well. It doesn't work everywhere, but this is kind of encouraging. Okay, bear with me. This is the only mathematics I'm going to show, but I just want to be very upfront about what the model is and what it is not. So this is developed by a lad named Don Stewart, 1980, did a PhD thesis. This model is popping up everywhere in these bioenergetic models, and I couldn't find the paper. So I emailed the lad, I don't know if he was alive or dead, found him, emailed him, he's 70-odd, Meredith Croft in Syracuse, New York, and he never published this stuff, but he had his PhD thesis in paper format, and he unbound it for me, scanned it for me, and gave me his PhD thesis. So now I have this at Don Stewart's work, and he's the co-author of this paper, right? So when people think they're smart, we're using stuff that has been 50 years ago. We're not that smart, right? Okay. So this model here, this FC subscript I just the individual fish, all right? So we have the swimming cost is going to be equal to whatever this is here. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but it accounts for the arc length, fish weight, and this being grams. It accounts for the temperature in degrees Celsius, and it accounts for velocity. And this here is a temperature coefficient for this model. Don't worry about that. It will become more apparent in a minute. So by illustration, then, let's say we are talking about a brook trout that's a pound, a bit over a pound, say 525 grams, and we keep it at a constant velocity, 20 centimeters per second. And we increase the temperature, you can see that this is the relative increase in swimming cost in joules per hour for that fish. So you keep the velocity the same, but you increase the temperature, it's going to cost that fish more to lie in that area. Okay? But then consequentially, you could also look at it in terms of keeping the temperature constant, so 14 degrees Celsius, and increasing the velocity. And then you can see for this brook trout, that it's going to start costing more for that brook trout to lay in areas where there's a higher velocity, even when the temperature is out constant. And this would be kind of optimal foraging habitat. Rick would know more than I would about this, but this would be, I think brook trout would be pretty happy there. So we can take this then, and we can apply it to this extreme temperature scenario. So there's our thermal infrared map. We can take our velocity map, and we can plug it into that equation I just showed you, and now we can map the spatial variability of the swimming cost for that 525 gram brook trout. Okay, so here's the I got it up there. Kill me bunch of mistake. So here we can see the swimming cost, spatial variability of swimming cost at this point in time. All right. Okay, so that's the nuts and bolts we're talking about. So what we're going to do is build some simulations then. Okay, so we're going to talk about young of the year salmon and 1.5 grams. This is from DFO paper 2016. Atlantic salmon, say about 8 grams. 2+ salmon, 18 grams. Brook trout, 30 centimeters. This is from a personal communication with Mark Gotro, for 525 grams. And then we have an adult Atlantic salmon, 10 pounds, assumed to be 4,500 grams, so 4.5 kg, right? So these are the fish we're going to look at, these mock fish. So then we're going to answer a question about what's the benefit of having access to thermal refuges. First, we're going to, this is a course now, but it's a model, and I said all models are bullshit, but they'll kind of give us a point of what may be important. So first thing, we cast across this area, we populate it with these points. And there's a point there every 10 meters, there's a fish, okay? So we will run the model for this scenario, and then we'll allow those fish to seek thermal refuge, but we'll allow them to seek thermal refuge at temperatures that we've observed them to move in. So for instance, adult salmon and brook trout, we'll say that they're seeking refuge by and large at less than 22 degrees Celsius, all right? Of course, Elise has shown other stuff now, but this is the assumptions we're making for this model. For 2+ juvenile Atlantic salmon and 1+, we're going to say they're going to seek out a refuge of 26.8. That's following findings of Emily Corey and even her stuff here earlier. This year we published on it. And then for young of the year Atlantic salmon, we will allow them to seek refuge when the temperature goes over 30 degrees Celsius. So this is consistent with Emily's work too, as she found in there about 30.5 degrees Celsius, Alex found in there about 31.5. All right. So just by way of what we're saying, allowing them to seek refuge, here we would hold a brook trout in these spots and raise the temperature up. And then we keep the same velocities, but we allow the brook trout to seek refuge in our brook. And we can look at the difference in swimming costs. All right. I think that a limitation of this, of course, when I speak about the limitations, is that optimal habitat. Obviously, brook trout aren't going to hang out in this ripple here, but this is simulation. So there's built-in uncertainty here, okay? And this is actually data from Alex's paper, so it published in 2022 as well. These are observations, they're qualitative, they're not perfect, but they give us an understanding of the spatial variance in how these thermal refuges are used by brook trout, adult salmon, which were used in the same areas that brook trout were, young of the year salmon, 1+ salmon, 2+ salmon. Right? So these are real, they're qualitative, but they're real. So we can look at the variances of having access to the refuge in this instance and not in this instance. All right. And just by way to illustrate this again, the limitations are here. Of course, these things aren't static through time, as Elise has spoken about. The onset temperatures can change as functions of variations. Okay, so results. So here on this y-axis, we're going to have swimming costs in joules per hour. And then we're going to have the orange bars are no refuge access. The green ones are refuge access. And then we're going to show with these blue, yellow, and red ones when the different swimming costs for each of those age classes and species at different temperatures. All right. So first, young of the year, excuse me, seeks a refuge here at 31.5. You can see that there is a reduction in swimming costs. Right. So this is when they're in the middle of the river. Then when they're out to the refuge, there's a reduction in swimming costs. This is as per Alex's data. All right. Of course, it's a function of fish weight, which is a function of length. So we go into 2+ fish, excuse me, 1+ fish, seeking refuge at 26.8. You can see that there is a decrease in the energetic cost once they move into that refuge. Similarly here, there's a decrease in energetic cost. So obviously, no shit, sure, there's a benefit to having access to a thermal refuge. Right? For 2+, it becomes more apparent. There's a bigger benefit when you start to use that thermal refuge versus the main river. And same thing for the brook trout, really, really consequential to adult salmon. So look at that differential there. So between even 23 degrees Celsius and between site with refuge active and without, there's quite a big difference in the swimming cost for that fish. Of course, if you put a 30-pound fish in there, it's going to be even more dramatic because it's increased exponentially. And just to simplify that, then you can look at the percent of swimming cost of energy saved with access to the refuge. Most alarming, I think, is the adult salmon ones. Following the same trend as the brook trout, but that's a function of the equation. But you end up with a 250% energetic benefit when you have access to the refuge, which is really quite something. So if we're thinking about adults, they don't feed in the river. Most of their bioenergetic model is going to be controlled by the swimming speed. If they're stressed out, through chemical biology, they're going to focus more on surviving than egg development. So this is really consequential for things that happen on the way down the line. Okay, so the second one then is what impact does increasing the velocity in thermal refuge have on swimming costs? So just a sidebar here. So when we think about thermal refuges, by definition, we're talking about temperature, but it's more than temperature, right? So there's, as I just showed in that equation, there's the weight of the fish, there is the velocity, which is probably Reynolds number is probably a better parameter to use, and I'll speak about that in a moment. There's biological interactions between the fish themselves. And Elise is showing this. So we have, in one instance, we'll have a par in this Goldilocks zone, but then in the next image, you've got adult salmon come in, those par are kicked out of the Goldilocks zone. So we have these interactions within the refuge that are happening over very short timescales that are consequential to the fish itself going forward. This is complex stuff. That's my point here. But if we decant it for a moment and just think about velocity, we're going to do a simulation. So we're going to take what Alex found here, and so we're going to take all of these data points, and the thermal refuge it's really delineated quite well by the fish. It's here. It's not this deep area here. It's right here. And we're going to put those fish, move them out 5 meters into this deeper pilot channel here, or channel. It's going to be higher velocity there. So now we can see, we keep the temperature identical, but we increase the velocity. So then we're able to see what happens to those fish when we change the velocity in the thermal refuge. Okay, so this is just by way of illustration, then this would be for the brook trout and adult salmon. They were here. We're going to move them here. Okay, temperatures are the same. We're just going to change the velocity. Just by way of illustration, then, so this is the lower velocity area. I hope no one here is colorblind. Apologies if you are. We would take the fish from here and move them into this higher velocity area here. Okay, and just to look at the differences in the observations from Alex's data of velocity to what we simulated. This is just a simple t-test here, actually, the man Whitney's not here from here. So what you end up seeing here is that there's a significant difference in the velocities for all of them except for young of the year. Okay, so we've increased the adult salmon velocity regime from 40.6 centimeters per second, excuse me, to 64.7, which isn't massive, but it's doubled. Excuse me, it's increased by 50%, but it's not ripping there, right? Like it's not going very fast. Okay, so just to decant what's going on here, we have our observations in the gray, and we're going to have the velocity simulation in the blue. All right. Again, we have adults, adult brook trout, 2+, 1+ young of the year, salmon. So for young of the year, when we move those into the higher velocity area, there's barely any change. And that's because they were already occupying an area in that refuge that was relatively high temperature, and the velocity didn't even change because it was driven by the pilot channel. What I will say though is, and Rick has seen this himself, there is areas that are little thermal niches that these young of the year will occupy that have low temperatures, not too low. There's a trade-off with the temperature stuff too, because it becomes metabolically costly if you go too low. But there's going to be some Goldilocks zone where you have relatively cold temperatures, low velocity. That's the barrier. That's what you're after here, right? You can see here for the and the reason why there's 2 plots here is that they're allowed thermal refuge at 26.8 degrees Celsius and 31.5. So here the observation is here. You can see that there's an increase in swimming costs for the 1+, similar for the 2+. It's even bigger for the brook trout. The cost when you're keeping the temperature the same, but you've increased the velocity, and then it gets pretty considerable for the adult salmon. Right? So this is for a 10-pounder. If you're talking about a 20-pounder fish, it's going to be even more. So it's not just temperature you got to talk about here; it's velocity. okay? And when you see the relative, the change in swimming costs as a percent, it's mostly important for the adults, right? So when we have these thermal refuges, again, temperature is one part of the, it's really a three-order system where we have maybe a hydraulic component, a temperature component, and the behavioral component. That's what's controlling this. So there's limitations, of course, like everything. So these models are quasi-two-dimensional. So they're operating in X and Y. They're not going through the water column, right? And this is really important. So this is von Karman's law of the wall. If you think about increasing depth here, the further down you go into the water column, the lower the velocity is because you friction from the bed holding that water back. We know salmon don't hang out here; they'll hang out here. So this is where there's a limitation in the model. But as a first effort, it's not awful. Also, the velocity on its own cannot account for the hydraulic state of flow. We could use a Proud number for that. So that describes the state of the water. But even the Proud number doesn't describe turbulence regime, but a Reynolds number would. So there's ways that we can get at this to actually get toward what the mechanism is. The Reynolds number is lovely because it accounts for the temperature of the water, the kinematic viscosity, which impacts the velocity. So all of these things are closer integrated together. So it's going to be velocity, depth, the temperature, all are influential. You can't pull one out, they're all interlinked, right? And of course, then you got to think about the fish. So there's a biological component to this as well. So this is a lot, but it's a paper that we're working on at the moment. We're trying to reframe thermal refuge rather saying it's a bioenergetic refuge, right? So it involves Reynolds number, maybe a Goldilocks zone is where you've got the lowest physiological cost and metabolic cost. And what might this look like? It may look like this hot spot here where the water has got a perfect depth for that age class. The Reynolds number is low, so there's low turbulence regimes there, and it's relatively cool. If it's too cold, it's going to be costly for the fish. So this is kind of the three-dimensionality that we have to check into for thermal refuges. Okay, so that's enough bullshit there. Let's actually show how this goes into real life. So it does what I'm saying here transpose into real life, and that's really the Goldilocks question. So here we have black brook, we have an August for summer regulations, they're all adult salmon, and then we have the salmon in the same spot in September. There's tons of fish here, incredible spot. In August, when the temperature has gone to normal, so non-thermally stressful, by both of you, we end up seeing that the fish are gone. Okay. And this is why they're here, the thermal pool. But we can take it a step further and we can look at this here, because the same stuff I just showed you last time, but now it's for adults. So here we have this marker here is the polygon delineating the thermal plume. And what I want you to look at is here, so the velocity. Number one, fish aren't in the deepest areas. They're in areas that are about 1 meter deep and about velocity of 0.3 meters per second, and they have boulders, right? So there's an equation in there that I know, and I'm keeping it for my company, so you're not getting it. So it does seem to work, okay? So the point here is to look at the aggregation. So we have a group of fish here, and we have a group of fish here. And this is really interesting because this group here, this would be cooler. Because it's closer to the tributary, so it's going to be less mixed. So why aren't the fish there? So I don't know if you guys are familiar with pelotons in cycling, but in cycling, you have these pelotons where the sprinter is in the middle. Or the sprinter is here, depending on wind direction. So they're trying to protect the sprinter from cost, right? They want to save that sprinter's energy to sprint at the end of the race. And this is a lovely paper by folks out of Holland, Blocken et al. I'm going to speed up to here. So you can look here, they looked at the percentage of drag compared to an isolated cyclist. So comparing this cyclist to others throughout the pack, this cyclist at the front gets walloped, right? But if you compare the relative drag to this cyclist here, it's about 7.5%. So there's a benefit to being in the peloton for drag. So let's look at these fish again. Bigger fish are in here. It's the paper Tommy and I are working on. Bigger fish are here, smaller fish are here. This is what it looks like in terms of hydraulic drag. So the fish at the front get walloped, and the fish in here are doing energetically better. So there's an energetic benefit in the peloton position. Lower velocity here. So it's velocity and temperature and fish size. Okay. Then we can think about it in terms of how far downstream this peloton may influence hydraulic drag. So if we think about this very simply for a moment, if we have a boulder of a meter diameter, the influence of this boulder is going to be consequential of like 3.5 times the diameter of boulder downstream. You actually have this recirculating current here. So this is the minus velocity, it's going back upriver, and that's where the fish are hanging out. Right? So they're circling those upstream edges. Same way if you put a canoe in here behind the rock, fish do the same thing. But it's a particular depth and velocity, there's selection curve for that. So if we go back and look at this now, so this is 29.4 meters long. We have a 35-meter gap, and then we have these fish. So conceptually, what's happening is these fish are surfing the wave from these fish here. So they've changed the velocity regime, and even though the temperature is a bit warmer, there's still a trade-off with the velocity. So it's temperature and velocity in that bioenergetic. All right. So salmon are selected for cold water and hydraulics, and of course I put in there interactions between the HVACs as well in the species. Okay, and formations or swimming strategies are conceptually they decrease energetic cost. So, and we also have these bio-derived hydraulic refuges, which I think are just really fascinating. It's kind of like ECs, which are super smart. Okay, so just by way of an application example, then, and I'm almost finished then. So this is a Blackbrook. It's a project spearheaded by Dr. McCallum and I, and we tried to augment this thermal refuge using these data and these models that we've developed. So this is my company, Ecohydraulics, that put the logos on it, but you can see that the southwest pyramid sheet then is pro-glacial paleo channel. So this is sitting in a channel that's a couple of thousand years old, and within that we have the confluence of Blackbrook, and we have the main stem southwest. So just by way of context, we have this photograph here, a drone image. You see the adults, there's the thermal plume they're hanging out in, and this is underwater camera footage of what they actually look like. So this was a really interesting, or a really nice chance to ground truth these models. So that the models are bullshit, but we can use them to inform us with stuff. So here we can see the flow direction is the blue arrow. We're going to focus on this box here, and we have boulders that are placed there at specific depths and specific velocities. I flew over this site before we put the boulders in. There was no fish there. And then we put the boulders in, and within 20 minutes, we have 2 fish there, flow directions this way. And we have fish all here. Here's the boulders. So what's interesting here is these boulders, if you multiply that diameter by 3.5, that's what the fish are. So my point of this is that if you build it, they will come if they are present. You have to fish first. So this is pretty neat. So in summary then, remote sensing is an incredibly powerful tool for hydrology, but ecology as well, and how to integrate those fields. Velocities and one-question turbulence in general are critical for salmon and bioenergetics, and it seems to be that the most important for larger fish, especially those that aren't feeding in the river. And then our conceptual models seem to work in the real world, but these need to be tested and tested again. If we can't break them, then that becomes nice, but if we break them, then we've got to go back to the drawing board. So I'd like to thank the NSA, UNB, and the Government of Canada for the funding for this project, and if you have any questions, I'll try to answer.